Hey guys, Jexi here. Welcome back to another video. So today I thought I'd talk a little bit about how I know I'm an addict. It's something my kids ask me a lot, like how are they going to know if they're addicts when they get older? And it's not really the easiest question to answer for somebody else. So I thought maybe I'd discuss like how throughout my life I had different experiences that let me know for sure that I'm an addict. So I would say that most of us who deal with addiction and are in recovery have some common ground in regards to knowing we were addicts before we had drug problems. Now may not be for everybody. Some people may not have actual any insight that they were susceptible to being an addict until they were addicted to some type of drug. Now, I think it's also important to remember when I'm speaking, I'm talking about addiction as the disease of addiction that is more than just a dependency on drugs, that it's actually like a whole mind-altering experience, right? Somebody can be on opiates for a long period of time and be dependent on them and not necessarily be an addict, right? They get off the opiates, they move on with their life, and they never look back. For someone like me who's an addict, any drug can become a problem for me and set me off on it's like my brain doesn't have that off switch, right? So once I start using, I have a hard time stopping. So I just want to make that clear. Like just because somebody's taking something, I'm not necessarily talking about anybody else. I'm just sharing my own experience with what addiction means to me. So I would say the first way I knew early on that I was probably an addict was my parents talked a lot about addiction to me. I remember my drug talk was something like, look, I know you're going to experiment with things, but you have addiction on both sides of your family, so chances are you may have a problem, so you need to be really careful. I remember at that time, maybe I was like 14 or something, thinking like that was kind of a crazy drug talk from my parents, right? But the reality of it is, like, that was a warning I needed, and it was something that stuck with me even into my adult years. And it's a similar conversation that I've had with my own children. Look, we can't prevent somebody from being an addict, right? But as I tell my son, if you never pick up drugs, like, you don't have to worry about whether you carry that gene that makes you an addict, right? Because I think there's probably a lot of factors. It's not all illnesses are directly genetic, right? Usually you have a genetic predisposition to something and then environmental factors trigger it, right? So like you're not going to be a drug addict if you've never taken drugs, but not every person that takes drugs ends up being a drug addict, right? So I think just like good communication and having an understanding of what addiction is was like an early sign for me that I was maybe going to have a problem. It obviously doesn't necessarily mean I would have, but I knew pretty early on like the signs. So the next reason I knew I was a drug addict, long before I had like a real problem with drugs, was the way that I used. I realized early on that I didn't use the same way everybody else did. I felt like I needed more than everybody else to get the same feeling other people were having. I also never knew when to stop. Like I couldn't stop. Even from beginning of my using, and it didn't matter what drug it was. It could have been alcohol, it could have been anything. If there was more, then I wanted to keep doing it till there was nothing left. And then when there was nothing left, like it was depressing. And I remember having I had to watch with drugs that had like a hard come down effect because it would put me in a very deep depression because I didn't like the fact that we had no more. That was something I struggled with very, very early on with all drugs, was the using till there was nothing left and then being very sad when it was over, right? I noticed that most of the people that I used with like didn't have those same feelings, right? Like we used something and everybody had fun and it was a great time and it was over, you know? I would get halfway through the feeling and as soon as I felt the littlest tiny bit of things wearing off, I would be like almost desperate to get back to that feeling. And it was just something that other people I was around like didn't seem to experience. Like I closed down many a bars, staying like way too late, getting way too drunk. I used in excess pretty early on, and that was before drugs really became like a problem for me, right? Like, I didn't really have a real problem with drugs, where drugs like took over my life until, years after my kids were born and I was into adulthood, right? But I had started, the first time I used drugs, I was like 15. And it was just a one-time experience, and then it was years later when I had used anything else again. But I pretty much always was looking for the next one, and it didn't ever matter what it was. The other way that I knew that I was an addict, like long before I started having problems with drugs, is I always felt like drugs were an answer, right? Like if you were looking to have more fun at a place, like then you should drink. If you were looking to like do this, then you should use this drug. Like I always kind of believed that certain drugs were the answers for certain things. If you feel this way, take this drug. If you're experiencing this, try this, right? Like I smoke pot all the time. And I really just felt like if you need to relax, smoke pot. You need to eat, smoke pot. You need to sleep, smoke pot. Like you're in pain, you should smoke pot. Like I felt so much like different drugs were the answers. And I could argue with a person on like why different drugs were better than whatever else people were doing. Looking back, I can see how ridiculous that was. But I really didn't have a problem. Like I didn't think there was any dangers in using drugs. Like I really didn't, even though I knew that drugs were dangerous. And I think that this is important to remember. I think this is important to remember for anybody. Those of us who are addicts, for the most part, and I really can just speak for myself, but this I have found to be relatable across the board for most people who are addicts. We know drugs are dangerous, right? Like if you ask us the dangers of drugs, we probably know more than you do about how dangerous they are and all the side effects and the chance and the statistics of it killing you and all this stuff. We probably know more than the general public about it. But what we also have a problem with is we always think it's not going to impact us. I've used that drug enough. It's not going to be a problem. I have a tolerance for that drug. It's not going to be a problem. I'll know what it feels like if I start to OD, so it won't be a problem. I'll be able to know. Like, we really believe that we are so smart with drugs that we're never going to experience any of the negative consequences that other people go through. And I think that's why you see so many overdoses happening now. Like, yes, most of the time the drugs are laced with fentanyl, which is a lot stronger than regular heroin. Sometimes it's a person goes out and relapses and they haven't used in so long and they go to use the dose they used last time and it kills them, right? But the main reason drugs kill people is because we don't ever think it's going to happen to us. Like, we're not going to be that statistic. Like, I can tell you many times, I was in really, really bad areas, like walking through cities I never should have been in. And I remember that feeling of, what do I have to worry about? Like, it was almost like this feeling, and you didn't feel superior, right? You don't feel like you're better than, you just feel like, I don't know, like that it's just not going to be you. Like that statistics don't matter to you. Like I never felt I was in danger when I walked around certain places, and maybe I just didn't care. But I don't remember feeling like, oh, well, I'm better than. I just didn't believe anybody would bother me, and for the most part they didn't, and I'm pretty lucky about that. But I look back on some of the situations I put myself in, and it blows my mind, like my frame of mind. Like walking around like late at night and like a like 110-pound like little white girl like walking through some really, really rough areas and like it not even crossing my mind that I was putting myself at risk. Like I look at that now and I'm like, like I was crazy, right? And I think that's often a sign of addiction, is our ability to just live in our own reality, really believing the kind of craziness we tell ourselves. Now, one of my favorite things about that I've learned from being in recovery, and if you either know this or you are about to be amazed, there is a quote that is often credited to like Ben Franklin or Albert Einstein, right? That actually comes from the 1983's first publication of the Narcotics Anonymous basic text. Do you know what that quote is? I'll tell you. The quote is, "Insanity is repeating the same mistakes over and over, expecting different results." Most people credit that to somebody really smart. In reality, it was written by a bunch of drug addicts. But I think that's something that as addicts, a lot of us can relate to is we do the same things over and over again, like wanting things to change, right? Like we want something to be different, but we don't do anything different, right? Like if I want to live life off drugs, like I got to stop using drugs. But I can't tell you for how long I would use drugs just wishing I wasn't using drugs. An addict is somebody who will use when they don't want to use. So if you're questioning about the fact of like, am I an addict? I don't know. Like, are you using when you don't want to? It's probably a good sign that you're a drug addict, right? Like, other people don't do that. Regular people who are not addicts don't say, oh, I really don't want to smoke pot today, but I guess I have to, right? Like, that sounds insane. But as a drug addict, we do that stuff all the time. I remember using and not wanting to use anymore and crying over the fact that I didn't want to use, but I felt like I had to, right? Like that's not a normal people way of thinking. And so I would say for my whole life, I pretty much understood the fact that I was an addict. And now that I'm in recovery, I can better understand some of the thought processes I've had like growing up throughout my life and like how some of it was just completely insane. The fact is, though, is I can look at those behaviors now and understand myself a bit better. And I can also see it in other people. I can relate to what other people are going through because I've been through that, you know? And I think the greatest thing about being in recovery now is addicts are taught in recovery to relate to each other, to find things that I have in common with you and that you have in common with me, and connect on a level where we can understand each other. And so I try really hard, like when I watch other people or I see problems that people have or whatever, I'm always trying to be understanding. I'm always trying to relate to that other person. Like, how would I feel if I was in their shoes? Would I act the same way? Would I do the same things, right? Because addiction can make us do some pretty crazy stuff. And especially I've noticed for people who aren't like really, really working a recovery program, it's so easy for those addicted behaviors to like creep back in and take over our lives. And we don't see it. Like we really don't see it. And so sometimes it takes outside people to point it out. But I don't know. I was never in doubt. I always knew I was a drug addict. And I know that recovery has to be a part of my life forever. And I don't have a problem with that. Like that's something I've known for a long time and it's something I've accepted. So now I have this amazing opportunity to share my recovery with you guys, to let you guys in a little bit on my life and how recovery works for me, and maybe give you a better understanding of like how addiction has played a role in my life long before I ever really had a drug problem. You know, like I wonder if that's something you guys can relate to. Like, did anything I say sound familiar? Is anything relatable there? How did you know you were an addict? Or are you not an addict and you know somebody who is? Or I don't know. Like, tell me what you think. I just want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really just wanted to give some insight into how I felt as an addict before, like throughout the stages of my life, before I became like all consumed by drugs. Because we don't just wake up one day and become completely dependent on drugs in our life, right? It is a slow progression. And there's a lot of things that happen leading up to that show signs of addiction long before I'm addicted to drugs, you know? So thank you guys so much for watching this. I hope you got something out of it. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe before you leave. It helps me so much. If you want to support this channel in a financial way, which helps me out like more than you know, you can join my Patreon. It's a really great way to help. We also do trivia every Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's a live game. It's super fun. Ask anybody who plays. You'll love it. Stop by. Have some fun. And yeah, I look forward to speaking with you guys all on Friday. Thank you guys so much for all your support, and I'll see you then. Bye, guys.